and we're losing our ability as society to consent. We're handing over a lot of power to potentially a small number of people. AI covers all kinds of different technologies, and it's basically a term that we've historically used to describe tech that's meant to emulate human intelligence. That many of the workers who are now on the front lines of AI and automation risk are not the ones that people thought they would be in the past, and therefore they aren't really set up for success, focusing on kind of how can we as a society recognize that for whatever reason people are being impacted right now with job loss.
Welcome back to UnionBase, where we cover unions, AI, and the future of work. In today's discussion, we're going to cover everything from how the landscape is changing as AI is being introduced into the workforce, how workers are responding to that, and what we can do. I don't want to say to fight back. I want to say to adapt ourselves to the changing environment, because we need to think about how we're going to respond, and everything isn't always a fight. There may be moments where we have to fight, but we need to think about how we want to respond. Without further ado, let me introduce B. B is the Director of Emerging Technologies for Aspen Digital, a program of the Aspen Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing together current and emerging leaders to unlock their potential and take on the world's greatest challenges. Welcome, B.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Our pleasure as well. So, B, there's so much conversation happening right now, particularly on job loss. A lot of friends just anecdotally have told me that they've had trouble finding a job, or they got laid off and their company's now leaning into AI. I really want to dig into how you're thinking about this. But first, let me ask you, do you think that the news is covering this accurately?
Yeah, it's a complicated environment right now. As you've mentioned, there are a lot of folks who are looking for work, some of whom previously worked in the federal government, some of whom are connected to organizations that have been implementing AI. And there's also a lot of kind of confusing ways that people talk about these topics. And so I think that on the one hand, as someone who has been working on AI and labor issues for a long time now, I definitely think that we need to be paying close attention and really be mindful of the ways that automation and the ways that people implement it can lead to job loss or fewer jobs being available. At the same time, I think that we need to be critical consumers of some of these headlines as well. One of the things that we see a lot right now is there are many companies that are reducing their staff or laying people off, and they are talking about how they're implementing AI and it's because of these efficiency gains that they're able to do this. When in reality, the story behind the scenes could be a little more complicated, right? Like, there might be other reasons related to having less revenue or other motivations for letting people go. And a positive spin to put on that is, hey, and we're introducing AI, right? So to the investors of those companies, it might sound better to say we're reducing headcount because we're introducing this new technology than to say we're reducing headcount because we didn't make our earnings goals or whatever. And so I think that as much as it is true, and we should absolutely be pushing for people to be more straightforward about the way that AI and other forms of automation can impact employment, I also think that we need to be a little bit skeptical when we hear these claims, because it's possible that the things that people are claiming are results of AI or automation might actually have some more complex stories behind the scenes.
The media loves narratives. I think people beat up on the media unfairly a lot of times, but things have to be in sort of a narrative wave to get our attention. And I think sometimes it can affect the way we think about these issues. Recently, I saw Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff was stating that AI is now performing 30 to 50% of the work at Salesforce. And according to CNBC, he refers to this as digital labor revolution, which is kind of funny coming from the labor movement, right? Hearing that called the labor revolution. And he says this increased productivity due to AI, and it led to a reduction in hiring needs, particularly for engineers. Now, Benioff is stating that they won't be adding engineers in 2025. So do you see this as part of that sort of misrepresentation you mentioned, or do you think that this is one of those instances where it really is impacting the labor force?
I won't claim to know the details of the specific instance of Salesforce, but what I will say is that there are places where the recent forms of AI and automation that we're seeing have dramatically transformed, if not entirely, reshaped what some jobs look like. Engineering is not one of the ones that I've been seeing as much of. I think that there are lots of places, engineers are incredibly, often high paid and often, as a result, expensive workers to have. And so there's a lot of incentive from employers to try to reduce that labor cost. So people absolutely want for better or worse, people want AI to be able to reduce their engineering staff. And yet, as much as people have been applying these tools in this space, at least from what I'm seeing, it's really a mixed bag still in terms of whether or not AI is really effective in that space yet. I think that we should be on the lookout. We should continue to watch trends like this and look for announcements like that. But right now, there's still a lot of questions about the kind of short term gains versus the long-term impacts of automation in engineering and development. When we're seeing these headlines, we should both recognize that AI might be playing a significant role, and recognize that, those are those are workers and jobs that, for whatever reason, whatever the justification may be, are being impacted. Focusing on kind of how can we as a society recognize that, for whatever reason, people are being impacted right now with job loss and or lack of opportunity, like you said, for junior folks coming into the field or people changing jobs, and that has implications for all of us.
What I'm hearing a lot on some of the business channels is that people need to go and get into the building trades, right? Which is kind of funny because I hadn't heard that in a long time. I mean, in labor you hear that a lot, but you never hear the business channel saying that plumber jobs are the ones that are going to be safe. But I love that you brought up workers and unions, because I want to know, it's still early, but have you seen any examples where unions or workers have successfully influenced how AI is used in the workplace?
Yeah, so you're probably familiar with the Uni Global Union, which is this kind of coalition of labor organizations. And they actually put out, in 2023, they put out a report called Algorithmic Management Opportunities for Collective Action at the end of 2023. And it has in it both some recommendations of, if you are facing algorithmic management, strategies that you might try, but it also includes case studies, examples from around the world of labor groups actually leveraging, whether it be the laws in their country or in their state, or their collective bargaining action in order to push back. So absolutely, people are working in this space, and I think that there are there are existing infrastructures that people are standing on when it comes to organized labor and response to AI and automation in the workplace. But many of the jobs that we now see AI impacting are ones that are not as well represented. So while, of course, we've heard news about the actors and the writers guilds pushing back because they already had these kind of organized structures, talking about those engineers and developers, those coders, most of them are not organized in any fashion, right? And so while there absolutely are strategies that people have been using to push back and to be able to kind of exert more worker control over the ways that these technologies are being implemented, it is also the case that many of the workers who are now on the front lines of AI and automation risk are not the ones that people thought they would be in the past, and therefore they aren't really set up for success to be able to work together and to collectively bargain the way that some of, like you said, the trades.
You're absolutely right. People thought that it was going to be the truck drivers and, very hands on things that will be done, probably because they underestimate the difficulty of those jobs and what it takes to get those jobs done correctly. And now we're seeing a lot of white collar jobs sort of under pressure here So, with that said, which white collar professions do you think are most likely to be disrupted by AI tools like chatbots, automation, things like that?
We're still in the early days of the adoption and implementation of these technologies. And so there's spaces where we know that we've already seen really dramatic impact. And there are places like engineering and development that I mentioned before where jury's still out. So certainly there are spaces, a classic example is call centers and translation jobs. Those jobs are being very much transformed by these technologies. Sometimes that means an actual reduction in jobs. Sometimes that means that the work that is involved is different, right? If you were a translator before and now you end up doing a lot of cleanup work because people have used generative AI tools, that may be a different type of job than you had been doing before. A lot of the roles that people are having conversations about are roles that are very kind of writing forward. So we see a lot happening in spaces like the kind of communication space. We see a lot happening in conversations around technology for kind of producing content. So this could be visual content or video content. There are a lot of questions about how these technologies are going to impact those fields. But at the same time, there's also a lot of open questions, right? A few years ago, people were saying that, radiology jobs are going to go away because we have automated systems that can detect, medical imagery, issues in medical imagery. And in reality, those jobs didn't go away. And instead, what happened is a lot of people who were like, uh-oh, I don't want to go into a dead end field. They didn't go into those jobs. And now there's a shortage of radiologists. And so it's very unpredictable. And even where we see automation being implemented today doesn't mean that it will stay that way, or that, once we kind of see some of the longer term ramifications, that it will necessarily stay, a strategic place to use automation. But I think we also don't want to kind of rest on our laurels and say, like, don't worry about it. These changes are changing the way that people work, and some of those changes may reduce the number of people that are involved. And I think that people right now, many of the people who are developing AI actually measure the success of their AI. They consider advanced AI to be the AI that is most capable of replacing people's jobs, right? Like most capable of being used to do, economically valuable work. And so if that's the way that we define the success of these tools, if the way that advanced AI is defined is contingent on the ability to basically act as a substitute for labor, then there's always going to be this tension. There's always going to be this risk. Even if the technology isn't that great, people might still be implementing it to try to reduce the labor costs of running their business.
What I'm thinking when I'm hearing a lot of these founders talk about, particularly AI agents, and hoping that they can replace a good deal of work. And obviously that just increases anxiety for a lot of workers. But I think that's great advice. Don't let the hype or the narrative change the decisions that you make. Maybe adapt and try to figure out how you can fit into that. That radiology example is really great. So another conversation that we've been having on this channel is about data, and people are concerned how their data is being used. What are the ownership, rights around that? So should workers have the right to negotiate how their personal or workplace data is used to train AI systems?
Short answer, I would say yes, right? Like, I absolutely think that people should be able to negotiate on those terms. And I think that the way that we as a society talk about data is actually a little bit misleading. And so, what I mean by that is a very common way that we talk about data is to talk about my data or your data, right? And that feels so visceral. Like it makes sense. You're like, this is my data, right? It makes you feel a sense of ownership and empowerment around it. But the reality is not so clear cut. Data is not something that is only about one individual. Take this call, for instance, right now. Is this call your data or my data, right? If I gave someone permission to use this video recording, is that up for me to do? Probably not, because we're both implicated in it. And that's maybe obvious right now because, both of our faces are on the screen. But it gets a lot more complicated when we think about the reality that data often represents a relationship between people. And so when I think about things like data privacy or rights around data, it's not as clear cut as your data versus my data. But really, it's, I think, better that we talk about it as like data about me or about you. And it might be about both of us. It might be about our relationships to other entities. And because of that, while we should absolutely develop better ways to negotiate around the terms of these things, we also need to recognize that the line is very blurry of how proximate or how identifying or how damaging data might be. And so, to give two examples to kind of illustrate this, when I was working in the US Congress, I was really interested in worker data privacy in particular. And I was looking into this space and I was reading over bills that were oriented around defending worker data privacy. And it was a lot of good stuff, right? Lots of well-intended worker protecting legislation. And at the same time, a lot of that legislation would have gotten rid of or made illegal use cases that workers themselves have advocated for, like predictive maintenance, right? We know that having, for instance, a line go down is incredibly costly and can lead to a lot of kind of stressful in the moment work for folks who are working in, for instance, a manufacturing environment. And so predictive maintenance can be one tool that allows us to, fix those problems before they occur and continue the kind of regularity of operations. The problem with that is if we say we're not allowed to use data on workers, for whatever reason, the information about the maintenance schedule and the information about how a person was using a particular tool might also be cut out. So we have to be careful about the way that we talk about worker data to make sure that we don't actually lose the ability for workers to actually get gains in quality of life and workplace well-being. On the flip side, we also see the case of data about workers in the entertainment industry, where there's been a lot of conversations about, likeness and people's, performances versus their voices with the voice actors. And I think that it's so deeply personal, right? It's so deeply identifying. And there's this ongoing debate about how we should think about the type of harms that come from this. So I think that there's a broad spectrum when we talk about worker data. And so, absolutely, people should have the opportunity to negotiate around this stuff. But I think we should also be thoughtful when it comes to things like legislation in making sure that we don't accidentally, eliminate things that actually people have fought hard to advocate for.
I gotta ask, I've been hearing this term AGI all the time. AGI. We got to get to AGI in the startup spaces. I hear that a lot. So, what is it and how do we get there? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Should we get there?
Yeah. So AGI, so to start out, AI is this really big umbrella term, right? AI covers all kinds of different technologies, and it's basically a term that we've historically used to describe tech that's meant to emulate human intelligence. It could have been things like computer vision or image recognition back in the day when your camera would autofocus on a face. We'd be like, that's like an AI capability, right? And now we have all of these technologies like generative tools that perform in very different ways. And so AI is this very big umbrella that holds a lot of different capabilities and technologies. AGI, or artificial general intelligence, is a specific class of technologies or a theoretical class of technologies that basically stands for AI that is very capable. And the general in the artificial general intelligence means that it's not meant to just do one thing, like, image recognition or text translation, but can do lots of different things, all the different things. And different people define AGI in different ways. In OpenAI's charter, I alluded to this earlier, they describe AGI as highly autonomous systems that can outperform humans at most economically valuable work. Interesting definition. But there's lots of different ideas about AGI out there. I'm not a big proponent of AGI. There are lots of nerds who are super excited about the idea of bringing about new life forms and stuff like that. There's lots of great nerd energy out there. Um, at the same time, I think that AGI is very risky, right? We, as a society, have kind of depended on these productive frictions that exist between people in order to, make better decisions about society. We've limited the amount of power that any individual person can have, and we've created institutions like democracies that actually intentionally introduce friction to say, hold on, you need to get the consent of other people before you do stuff. As we build tools that make people more and more capable, or as we build tools that are themselves more capable, we're reducing that productive friction and we're losing our ability as society to consent. We're handing over a lot of power to potentially a small number of people. And so I think that some of the philosophical and academic questions around AGI are really interesting. I think that AGI and its pursuit has offered us a meaningful mirror to reflect back and look at ourselves as humanity and learn about how our brains work and how we make decisions. But I think that the pursuit of AGI, to me, is a little bit misplaced. I think that pursuing intelligence for intelligence's sake is actually not a great way to go about things. Like, I think we should pursue goodness. And if intelligence is part of what gets us there, heck yeah, let's build out the capabilities we need to do that. But I think that we need to be careful that we don't assume that building out just more and more capable systems is necessarily going to bring about positive benefits to people. And I think that in many ways, especially because we don't have a lot of experience with people having that much power to unilaterally make decisions, in reality, I think that in many ways it's going to be very dangerous and costly to us. So I would urge us to pursue AI in a way that is more focused on solving the problems of people and particularly the big problems of society, rather than this kind of concept of general intelligence that doesn't have a specific purpose.
We haven't stopped to think about what the impact could be.
It's a funny thing. The story of Jurassic Park, a lot of people take away from that film the idea that like scientists are getting carried away. But if you kind of look a level deeper, Jurassic Park wasn't about science. It was about building a theme park, right? It was about this business idea of actually like having this like, unbeatable theme park experience. And so from that end, maybe the science was okay, but it was actually our business drive to do things in a rush and haphazard and irresponsible way that actually put people at risk.
Clearly, I need to go back and watch the original.
I'm such a weenie about scary movies that I only watched Jurassic Park for the first time like a year or two ago, and it's very good. Definitely recommend a rewatch.
I wish I could watch it again for the first time. Okay, so that brings me to my other question about how do we potentially solve some of these problems? We've been hearing things about creating public ownership models for AI to help balance out the growing power of private tech companies. Do you think that's an option, a good option? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are a lot of different models and a lot of different strategies. And right now, I'm kind of the mind that we got to try them all. We need to try a lot of different things because we're in this new relationship with technology and with each other. And I think that we are seeing that a lot of the institutions that we've historically relied on to navigate these relationships are not up to the task. And so, with that being the case, I think that public ownership of AI systems is definitely one strategy I'd love to see people trying more of. I think that there are a couple of different ways that this can go about. So, when we talk about public AI in the public AI network, we are talking about kind of a broad set of criteria that could encompass many different incarnations of public AI. So the things that define public AI are public access, meaning that everyone has access to, at either like no cost or very little cost, the capabilities of AI systems and ideally the capabilities of building out AI systems. Public accountability, which means that when people are building AI, the public can have a say and a voice in what gets built, can actually direct which direction these technologies go, and that there is accountability in terms of when things don't go well. And then also permanent public goods. And this third one is really about the sustainability of public AI systems and making sure that, if we just give something away for free, or if we, just make an open source project, but the open source project gets taken over by, a single individual or a private corporation or whatever, right? That's no longer public. It's no longer guaranteed to be accessible and accountable to the public. And so the third category of criteria is really around making sure that there are sustainable models that can support these things. And so one version of public AI is a government managed AI system that is provided like a public utility at low cost or at cost to the public so that everyone has access, kind of like electricity and water, right? These are things that are public utilities that are broadly accessible. But you also might think about public AI taking the form of collective ownership that's not managed through a state, right? Maybe there's public AI systems that are built or managed by labor groups, by communities or coalitions of people. And so I think that when we think about public AI, the important thing that we hold is that we hit those three criteria and that we always be striving. I like to use the phrase kind of inspired by the preamble of the US Constitution, in order to build a more perfect union. Like, we are always going to be striving for a more public AI. I don't think that we should expect from the get-go to have the perfect version of it right away. But as long as we're striving to uphold those three criteria and always pushing for a more public version, I think that's the epitome of public AI.
And continuing with this theme of public versus private, should private companies be required to pay for the data they use, especially when the data comes from the public or from workers?
So, right now, what's happening is that AI companies are largely just scouring the internet, right? They're scooping up all the data that's available out there. And we've seen some recent court cases that have kind of been delineating how the particulars of that are or are not allowed within the United States context. I think that data ownership is complicated in the same way that paying for data is complicated, which is that figuring out who owns the data and who has the right to be paid or negotiate about it is unclear, because data is not like land or water or hours of the day. It is considered a non-rival good, which is, I can have a copy and you can have a copy, and you having a copy doesn't impact me, right? Directly. But we know that there are some fallout consequences of when people are using data to train AI models. So one of the things that we're seeing right now is that all of these like crawlers and scrapers that companies are using to go out and search the internet for information, they're putting a load on the internet, right? It's like having thousands or millions more people out there hitting your webpage. That is a cost that is incurred by the data providers, the people who put stuff online, and they're not necessarily seeing a lot of benefit coming back to them. We also see a case where data is being negotiated in some contracts and terms with intellectual property owners. So intellectual property owners are negotiating sometimes licenses, sometimes just memoranda of understanding, sometimes profit sharing agreements. That's really around trying to, I think in the best case, trying to ease some of the burden on data providers of this AI training use. But the downside of this is that that kind of puts the negotiation in the hands of IP holders, which, as we know, you could work at a company and your boss, your company, owns the information about the work product or even about your worker behavior. That's not necessarily coming back to benefit you directly. So I think the question of paying for data use is a really complicated one. I would love to see us having more nuanced conversations about this. And this is something that, along with some other collaborators in the public AI network, we've been making a resource to begin to really dig into some of these questions with more concrete data and hard facts. So at exploringai.org, we've been building out an interactive kind of explorable explanation, if you will, to say what are the things that we need to take into account. How much would it cost if we were to pay everyone to like rewrite the internet? And how much might we get if we were to like divvy up all of OpenAI's revenues and we all get a share. Unfortunately, the numbers aren't looking very good, but I think that we absolutely should continue to have this conversation about what it means to use data, what the potential kind of externalities of data use are, and how we can create a more sustainable ecosystem where people who are creating or working or otherwise doing activities that produce meaningful stuff for AI systems aren't just extracted from in that process.
And I will put a link to exploringai.org in the bio down below so folks can visit that. And we talked a little bit about the sort of space race, and countries seem to be competing to dominate AI, or from their particular market, their particular industry. How can public AI efforts help keep the focus on human needs instead of just national power?
So, one of the things that has gotten a little bit rhetorically twisted in people's conversations about AI is that a lot of the focus on AI development from countries has been really um, emphasizing national sovereignty, right? People want AI systems to be built and operate inside of their borders. People want these technologies to, understandably follow the rules of the land. But at the same time, we're seeing that rhetoric leading to a very kind of state oriented version of AI that isn't necessarily always in service of the public. It might be more focused on national security, or it might be more focused on, some of these questions around economic dominance. Public AI, I think, on the other hand, is really about centering the needs of the public. And I think state AI and sovereign AI absolutely can be public AI, but it needs to fulfill those criteria of public access, accountability, and sustainable public goods. And with that in mind, I think that one thing that we need to push for when we're looking at these sovereign AI efforts is making sure that people do have access, right? What does it mean for everyone in the world, or at least the citizens of that nation, to be able to have access to these tools? What does it mean to have accountability? What are the governance systems in place? It's great if your country or your state is negotiating some deal with an AI provider, but is that AI provider going to answer to you? Is there some sort of governance process to make sure that the public has a voice in those situations? And so to me, public AI, because it's this big umbrella, it means that there are many versions we can try, one of which is sovereign AI. But I think that we also need to make sure that we don't mistake sovereign AI for being public AI just because a government is involved, right? We need to continue to push for more public, more access, more accountability, etc. And one thing I will say is I think that very often, especially in my kind of academic and activist communities, there is often an idea that accountability is always about punishment, right? Like accountability is like, oh, you did something wrong. Um, but I don't think that that's the whole story. Accountability also means that the desires and the aspirations of the public are reflected. And so, one of the things that I'd love to see people doing more of is really engaging meaningfully in a public conversation, you know, with workers, with communities, about what do we want these technologies to mean in our lives. I think if we're always playing defense and we're always saying no, we're missing out on part of the power of this situation to actually dictate the futures that we want to see. And so that's part of the work that my team at the Aspen Institute is doing. We're working on community aligned AI benchmarks. The idea that the way that we measure success, instead of all economically valuable work or whatever, right? Instead of that, we can say, what do we as communities, as society, want AI to be in our lives? What capabilities do we wish existed? And actually challenge our AI builders, our sovereign AIs, our public AIs, challenge people to build the things that we want to exist, because that's an important part of accountability as well.
I know a lot of you all are subscribed for years to this channel. This is exactly what I've been saying, that you've got to be a part of the conversation. And if some of you at the state, regional, or even national level want to be connected to be, I'll make sure that that happens. And you know how to reach us at contact@unionbase.org. I want to get to the last question here, but you've given us a lot to think about. And this particular question is something that really excites me to get an answer from you, because I think a lot of people have this question: how can everyday people participate in decisions about how AI is used in their workplace and local communities?
The answers are kind of endless. Like there are so many different ways. But I'll say a few, and then I'll also point you to a resource. So one is I wrote a series of blog posts on my website about how to get into AI policy, which has a lot of examples. If you're interested in shaping the way that AI policy actually takes place, I highly encourage you to explore the many different avenues. So a few things that I think are really useful that you can begin doing right now. One, a few years ago, the United States government rolled out something called the AI use case inventory. This was a big initiative to track where AI is being used across the federal government. It's a huge undertaking because it's a huge government, but you might begin in your local context, right? Where is AI being used in your workplace or in your community? Just begin to track or ask questions and write things down. This isn't necessarily negative, right? It could be great that AI is being used in those cases, but it's really helpful when we're having a conversation about these technologies and what they mean in our lives that we understand what's out there. So, for starters, I think it can be really helpful to just begin to keep track of the use case inventory, right? Where are all the places that AI is being used around you? I think another way to get engaged is there are a lot of kind of organizations and community groups that are leading conversations about the way that AI is introduced. So I'm happy to share as a follow up, Larry, some of the links to orgs that people can check out depending on where they're situated in this big universe of AI. So, if they're folks in government, there's an incredible coalition ran out of San Jose called the GovAI Coalition. If they're folks who are involved in design or labor, there's all these different spaces to engage. And then, of course, I have to say, the Public AI Network is a community that I'm a part of, that I'm proud to have gotten to get to know you through, and the real ethos behind the Public AI Network is the idea that there are many different people in many different spaces who are all asking these questions. And if we can be working together to push for access, accountability, and permanent public goods, we can steer the future toward a better place. So we have a seminar series where people have, shared all kinds of ideas about the way that we can shape the future of AI. The most recent season of the seminar was focused on art and creative industries, which is a really interesting space where these conversations are taking place. So I would say, get involved in a community that is engaging on these issues, whether it's online or locally, and begin to really interrogate, where's AI showing up in your life? How do you feel about that? And you can begin to have conversations with people about what you wish existed that doesn't yet, as well as the things that are out there that maybe need to change the way that they're showing up.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and I think our audience is really going to take a lot from this. I usually offer folks the last word, and I think in particular, I really want to give it to you because you have such a wealth of knowledge that is based on sort of intimately looking at these details from multiple angles. I think folks oftentimes only look at it from a builder perspective, investor perspective, or from a user perspective, and you sort of have a window into all those things. So why don't you give us the last word on this conversation? Also just say that the door will be open for future discussions, and we'll be asking our audience, which subjects they're most interested in and what they want to hear more. So you take it away.
Thanks so much. And thank you for having me. I think that, AI is a huge umbrella term and it's a huge topic, which means that there are so many different ways to think about it. And a lot of the conversation that we hear in the public right now is dominated by fear or hype, these kind of extreme emotions. And one of the things that I really love with what you're doing here at UnionBase is thinking about how we can have a more nuanced conversation about these technologies and really question what we want to see. And so the thing that I would like to leave people with, calling back to the community aligned AI benchmarks that we're working on at the Aspen Institute, is really to look into your own life and ask the question, are these tools working for me? And really asking the question, what do I wish technology was enabling in my life? Because I think that a lot of our conversations is really focused on what's going wrong, but I think that we need to present, not just in tech, but in politics in general, a positive affirmative vision for what we want to see, whether it includes AI or not. And so that's what I want to leave people with, is that the future of this technology and the way it shows up in our lives is not set in stone. We absolutely still can change things. We can still make decisions about what the future looks like. And we need your voice and your opinions about what that future should look like.